No, don't you worry. As soon as that bus starts making its way through, I'm sure we'll bring those visuals up on air. But we also do need to talk about the African Growth and Opportunity Act. It's a meeting in Johannesburg. It's a very wordy title, isn't it? But it actually just means AGOA, in case you're wondering what I'm talking about. President Ramaphosa is addressing the forum today. This was earlier this morning, saying that more needs to be done to intensify the relationship between the United States and African countries. Now, remember, of course, we heard the same thing with BRICS just a short while ago, intensifying relations between those various countries in BRICS and Africa. But now back to AGOA. Several countries are benefiting from the agreement, and that South Africa has participated in creating jobs. Dan Moyane, you asked that very question in a conversation of yours earlier to an economist, saying it's difficult to measure at times, but yes, AGOA certainly is contributing to jobs. Hi, Dan.
Yeah, and Gareth, welcome back here to AGOA Forum. The 20th edition, of course, we're here at Nasrec, and thank you very much. You're quite right. It's difficult to measure, but we do know that those sectors, like in South Africa, like in agriculture, the citrus sector is benefiting from AGOA in terms of its exports there, our wine industry as well. And therefore, you know, it means those jobs that are in those sectors keep on going. Therefore, it's contributing to jobs. But overall, we've heard from the president and other speakers and commentators during this AGOA meeting and before it to say that there is an underutilization. So this is an opportunity, especially if it's going to be extended for a period of at least another 10 years. Some people wish it could be 20 years, but mostly the sentiment is around a 10-year extension. Africa is going to have to utilize it more and more to benefit its goods in terms of accessing the American market. Remember, this is a non-reciprocal agreement, Gareth. The African goods get in there under AGOA, and they are not subjected to tariffs. But American goods under the WTO, World Trade Organization's arrangements, they come into Africa, they have to pay tariffs. So the benefit really in that sense is to African goods. So the more that we can utilize it, the better. But I'm joined now by Dr. Stavros Nicolaou, while we wait for the Minister of Health, Dr. Joe Phaahla, to also join us, because Dr. Nicolaou, who's from Aspen, the pharmaceutical giant, was part of the panel discussion, which is still ongoing, Gareth, and unfortunately, the Health Minister, Dr. Joe Phaahla, can't be with us now. He is a co-chair of this current discussion, but luckily, Dr. Nicolaou managed to sneak out for us, and we really appreciate your time, Dr. Nicolaou. Welcome to eNCA. Welcome you on today.
Dan, thanks very much for having me. It's always a pleasure to be on.
Yeah, you've been part of this important breakout session that is being co-chaired by Dr. Phaahla, which is still underway, hopefully to be wrapping up shortly, around fostering enabling environments to expand health commodities manufacturing, okay? And you've been very much in that space as Aspen. But before we delve into that health sector in terms of the manufacturing possibilities under AGOA, for you, how has it been going? What is your sense? I mean, is the sentiment that I'm picking up is that people want this to be extended, AGOA, by another 10 years at least, and there could be new sectors that our country should look at.
Dan, let me start off by saying that AGOA is important for many different reasons. But let me just flag two before I respond directly to a question, because it's a lead into your question. The first thing we need to recognize, in this time where there's significant geopolitical tensions that are playing out, it's important that we keep building the bridges. And this is an economic bridge in the main. I'm not saying it's the only reason we've got to go. But if we're able to build these bridges around sound economic platforms, it will also help, I believe, with the global geopolitical tensions that are playing out. And South Africa as the lead, it's not by accident, I guess, that we're hosting AGOA in Johannesburg. South Africa is the lead, and I think we set the tempo in that regard.
It's like a gateway as well for AGOA into the rest of the continent.
Correct.
And also because of one of the conditions of the original AGOA, South Africa is recognized and respected as a constitutional democracy.
Correct, correct. And we're one of 35 countries, African countries, that are signatories to AGOA.
Yeah, soon to be 31. because America wants 4 countries: Central African Republic, Niger, Uganda, and I'm trying to think of the
there was a fourth one. Correct.
For them to be out because of alleged human rights violations and other challenges, and then Mauritania is being readmitted. That will mean
correct. So we don't know where the final number will settle.
Okay.
Because this is envisaged to happen from 2025. Yeah. Now let me make the second point. AGOA is also important for our country because South Africa is the biggest exporter on the African continent to the United States. And a number of sectors in our important sectors in our economy, such as the automotive sector, have benefited immensely from AGOA. So it's important that we renew it on acceptable terms, that we expand the scope of AGOA. These are all very important elements.
Are these acceptable terms being discussed here in Johannesburg?
They certainly are. And of course, with all of these conversations, they're an ongoing conversation. Of course, they never land immediately, but they are ongoing conversations, certainly. Now, let me, with what I've just prefaced, it's a good segue into the question that you asked me. Now, in terms of expanding the scope of AGOA, one of the sectors that has been identified is healthcare and pharmaceuticals. And not, again, by accident, because firstly, the continent has the most disproportionate disease burden of any continent in the world. So we should be establishing more of our own linkages and value chains. So the focus on regional manufacturing and capacity building on the African continent is really important. Now you might say, well, what has the United States got to do with it? It has everything to do with that because they're an important partner in a number of areas in the pharmaceutical sector. The first is the United States has technologies in terms of vaccines, diagnostics and other medical countermeasures. So we need to deepen that partnership around technology and know-how transfers. Second reason the US is an important partner for us is the US is a big donor and very influential in a number of the multilateral and international agencies and or institutions that procure healthcare and pharmaceutical goods on the African continent, such as, for example, Gavi, which is the Vaccine Alliance, PEPFAR, which procures antiretroviral drugs, the Global Fund, which procures ARVs, TB drugs and malaria drugs. So we rely on the US to reform the procurement policy of these organizations to benefit regional and local manufacturers on the African continent.
Yeah, Aspen is one of those manufacturers currently of medicines. I mean, the COVID-19 pandemic taught us some valuable lessons.
Yes.
And your business is already producing vaccines. Are you managing through AGOA to get some of that stuff going into the US, or is it only for the continent? And if so, non-AGOA states, because there's about 30 odd, as you said, countries that are part of AGOA. We've got about 54 recognized African countries. There's still a dispute over the Western Sahara in Northwest Africa. But how is that looking for you? If you could just share with that. I mean, are you confident that AGOA could be that vehicle as well to assist with that manufacturing and, of course, the exports?
There are two aspects to your question that I want to touch on. The first is, up until now, AGOA has not included any healthcare and or pharmaceutical concessions. So unlike the automotive sector, I'm just using that as
the textile sector and others.
Correct. It's important that we commence the healthcare conversations, and we have. I can't tell you whether there will be concessions around healthcare and pharma come 2025. But that's the one aspect. The second aspect, though, is it's important to use AGOA and the Africa Continental Free Trade Area as anchors in the conversations of driving increased capacity building and regional manufacturing, pharmaceutical manufacturing on the continent, because the United States is such an influential player globally. So even at WHO, there's something called World Health Organization pre-qualification to qualify your products for procurement. The US is a significant contributor to WHO. So these conversations here should lend itself to increased regulatory reform to assist Africa to build these capacities I'm referring to.
In this panel discussion that's still underway, you were part of just now, what is the sentiment that's coming out in terms of what you've just said? Is an understanding that there is a need to do exactly what you've just said to benefit regional pharmaceutical manufacturing, for example?
Very briefly, 3 points of alignment have come out. Number one, no dispute that health security leads to better social stability. Number two, you cannot rely in a time of crisis on others to assist your own plight back home. So there's a strong alignment on building and assisting to build regional manufacturing capacity and capability on the African continent, which is exactly what Aspen is pursuing, as you put it earlier. And then the third point of alignment is we need to deepen partnerships between the United States, South Africa and Africa so that we can assist in deepening these healthcare capacity building initiatives. So those were 3 areas of alignment, but I guess, Dan, as always, the devil's in the detail.
Yes,
and how do we take this forward in order, because words are cheap, but execution is more difficult.
The good thing I'm hearing, Dr. Nicolaou, is that there is the openness in AGOA to include the health sector, let's call it that broadly, in terms of that manufacturing that we're speaking about going forward. What it's going to look like, Gareth, we don't actually know, and we'll try and find out a little bit more as well, get a sense if there was anything further from the Minister of Health, Dr. Joe Phaahla, whenever he's available. But this is where I'm going to end our conversation with Dr. Stavros Nicolaou of Aspen. We have